All right, you guys are thinking about getting a new lens for an awesome new documentary project you're working on, and you want to know what lens should you get for your project. Is there one lens that will rule them all, or do you need a few lenses to help you tell this story? And that's what we're going to break down today. Today I'm going to go over everything that you need to know to choose the right lens for your documentary. Let's get into it. Welcome to the channel. My name is Alex Arfati, and this channel talks about all things documentary filmmaking. And today we're going to talk about specifically lenses. So you guys want to know what lens to buy, but the answer, unfortunately, hate to break it to you, but it's not that simple. There are a lot of variables and pros and cons to every lens that you could possibly buy. But what I will go over today is the lenses that I've used on my projects, why I decided to use them, and through the process, it should give you a pretty good indication of what lenses you should buy for your project. But before we get into that, I want to start by saying that I have been working like crazy on a project for over 2 years now, and I've finally partnered with a production company that is going to help me take my docuseries, Law of the Goat, to market. And we have pitch meetings lined up with Netflix, HBO, Hulu. And the reason why I'm telling you guys this is because the entire time I was filming, I felt a little bit insecure about the footage that we were getting because we weren't shooting this on Red cameras. We weren't using super nice cinema, high-end lenses. And I felt like maybe a lot of the stuff that we were shooting had to be reshot. And one of the first meetings that I had with the creative director from Blackfin, which is the company that we're working with, was he talked to me about, how everything was shot and how much he loved the direction of it, but he also loved the look and the feel of the shots. Specifically, he said the cinematography was beautiful. And as soon as he said that, I was like, man, this whole time I was sitting here worried about the equipment that I was using to produce this project. Meanwhile, this multi-million-dollar production company gets involved and they said that they love the cinematography that, we shot. The footage looks amazing. So don't feel like you need to go out and spend thousands of dollars to make a good documentary. You don't. What you need to do is focus on your storytelling, and you need to focus on honing your craft and honing in your skills. Now, that being said, lenses are extremely important, and choosing the right lens is important for the job because at the end of the day, it's a tool that's going to help you tell your story. Now, there are a few big factors in play when you think about making the decision for your lens. And number one for me, and number one for everybody, should always be price. Because if price wasn't an option, sure, go out and spend $100,000 on a lens. No problem. But let's be real, price is a variable, and it's probably variable number one. I knew I needed to buy a lens that was in my price range. So that's number one. Number two, I didn't know whether I should get a prime or a zoom lens. So I had to do a bunch of research on that. And that's definitely number two that you should think about, prime or zoom lenses. And number three, I wanted to make sure that the lens was sharp, but overall stayed neutral. And the reason why I didn't want like a vintage soft look or some kind of crazy anamorphic lens. I wanted something that could stay very neutral. Now, that was my criteria. Your criteria might be different, but you have to think about all of the things that are important to you and what you need for your project. Now, the lenses that I chose for Law of the Goat was all the lenses in the Sigma Art series. I got everything from an 18 to 35 to a 50 millimeter to a 24 millimeter. I've used on the project a 50 to 100. The whole time I shot, I knew that I was only going to use Sigma Art lenses, and that was the lens choice that I went with. I'm going to tell you guys exactly why in a second. First of all, they're all in my price range. All the Sigma Art lenses in that series are anywhere between $600 to $1,300. Now, after doing some research, I found that the Sigma Art series, the glass was the same as they use in the Sigma Cine series. So you're pretty much getting cinema grade glass in this art series, but the only difference was that the casing was different. The second thing that I noticed about these lenses were how sharp they were and how low you could get the aperture, how fast they were. For instance, on all the primes, the lenses go down to a 1.4, which in my situation of filming documentaries, you never know what kind of a lighting situation you're going to be in, especially when you're following somebody around. So being able to have that ability to go down to 1.4 aperture and let as much light in as possible was a huge plus and a huge bonus for me. Then the other thing that I noticed about these lenses, after looking at as much test footage as possible, I noticed that overall they were pretty neutral. They were sharp and they were moldable, shapeable, neutral, something that I needed. One of the biggest questions that I had for myself while I was filming this documentary was, do I want to go prime or zoom lenses? Now we have to address what are the pros and cons of both and why you should choose one over the other. The biggest difference between the two is focal length. Primes have one focal length, while zooms on the other hand have many focal lengths. If you have a 24-70 zoom, that zoom lens can go from 24 millimeters all the way to 70 millimeters and everything else in between. So that's actually extremely helpful when you're in situations that are uncontrollable and you don't know where your subject is going to be or what you're going to have to shoot. Being able to have all of these different focal lengths in one lens is extremely useful. But hold on, because there are some cons. The other big difference in the two would be speed. Primes tend to be faster, which means that they have a lower f-stop. And basically what having a lower f-stop does is two things. It gives you the ability to let more light into the lens, which if you're in a dark room could be extremely helpful. You don't have to pump up the ISO, which could give you noise issues. You could lower the f-stop to a 1.4, or even some lenses have a 1.2, which is pretty bright. It also gives a really shallow depth of field. And me personally, I love that look. A shallow depth of field really gives you a really good idea of depth and gives you a really good indication of how far or how close something is to the lens, which gives you that cinematic look. The other thing is that primes usually tend to be sharper. So now that you know the pros and cons to both, which ones should you choose? And the answer really depends on what it is that you're trying to film. To give you guys an example, when I first started filming Law of the Goat, I wanted to shoot everything on primes because I felt like, oh, well, primes are sharper. Primes have a lower depth of field. That's the look that I want for this film. But I quickly figured out that doing certain things with primes for this particular docuseries was impossible. For example, on a fight night, there's no way that you can control the entire night the distance that you're going to be from your subject. You might be smushed in a very tight confined area of like maybe 2 to 5 feet, and then next thing you know, boom, he could walk out to the fight and be, 15, 20 feet away from you. So it's extremely hard to shoot this with just a prime because you're just set at one focal length. If you choose a 35 millimeter, then the stuff that you're too close with, you're only going to get tight shots. You're never going to be able to get a wide shot. And then vice versa, if you're stuck at a 35 millimeter and you go out to film a fight and he's 20, 30 feet away from you in a cage, there's no way that you're going to be able to get everything that you want to get with that 35 millimeter prime. You're pretty much going to be at a wide shot the entire time. You have to think to yourself, what are the gives and takes? What are the advantages, and what can I live with and what can I not live with? Well, what I knew I couldn't live with when I was filming live events was missing a shot. I didn't want to miss a shot or not have the ability to get a close-up and a wide shot just because I wanted it to be a little bit sharper and have a little bit nicer depth of field. I knew that that wasn't the case for me. So after that, after I filmed my first fight night, I went out and bought an 18 to 35 millimeter Sigma art lens. And then I also went out and bought a 24 to 70 Sigma art lens. On fight nights, I knew that I would rent a 50 to 100 to give another one of my cinematographers out there the ability to zoom in really close at 100 millimeters. And each one of them gives you a different look and a different vibe. If I was just by myself and I had to just shoot that one situation, there's no way that I'm going to use a prime. I have to use a 24 to 70 millimeters. Now let's take this on to the other side of the spectrum. When I'm filming interviews, there is no need for me to have a zoom lens. 99% of the time when I'm filming interviews, I can control every single aspect of that interview. So if I have the option to shoot on a prime lens and control it and have a little bit sharper of a lens and shallower depth of field, I'm gonna take that. On every single interview that I shot for Law of the Goat, I used a 50 millimeter prime for the B cam to get that close-up tight shot on every single one of my subjects. And I just love the way it looks. First of all, in the Sigma art series, the 50 millimeter is the sharpest lens of that series. And then on top of that, you could also go down to 1.4. And at 50 millimeters at 1.4, it is a super shallow depth of field, which I love. So you got to think about the situation in which you're filming and try to play it out in your head. If you can control the distance between you and your subject, use prime lenses. That's a no-brainer. But if you're in an environment where you don't know what's going to happen, you can't control anything, and it's a live event or it's something happening, you have no idea what kind of a situation it's going to be, get yourself a zoom lens for that situation. And if you're going to be in those situations more often than you're going to be interviewing, then I would rent prime lenses for your interviews and buy a zoom lens that you could use for the duration of the project, because it's not like you can't use a zoom lens for the interviews if you have to anyway. Obviously, I would rather use primes, but if I had to choose one lens, it would probably have to be a 24 to 70 millimeter zoom lens. And the reason being is because you have pretty wide at 24, and when you get anywhere past 50 millimeters, you start getting into the more telephoto look. You don't really want to use super wide lenses on interviews. Usually, to make the face look more flattering, you want something, I would say, from 35 millimeters and above. And if I'm going to be really close up to the face, I want 50 millimeters and above. Now, if your price range is lower than the Sigma Art series, and you're not trying to spend anywhere between $600 to $1,300 on a lens, I totally get it. You know, go after what you could afford. There are definitely other affordable lenses out there, like Rokinon. Rokinon has some really nice lenses for around the price range of like $300 to $600 for prime lens. Or you could get an older generation Canon lens that you could still capture really great footage on. So you don't feel like you need to go out and spend a ton of money on, you know, the Sigma Art line series or any lenses that, you know, your favorite YouTubers or documentary filmmakers use to make their documentaries. Instead, focus on honing in your craft and what lens is best for you in your situation. That's it for today, guys. Thank you for watching. And if you guys want to learn more about documentary filmmaking, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.